Well, welcome everyone to another edition of the DC Capstone Report. Lance and I are pleased to bring you this report each week. You can check out some of our valuable content on our other sites called RollTideBama.com. We'd also love for you to go to freelancepictures.com. You can check out some wonderful work of Lance Shore's there that he does. And also go to our Facebook page and like our Facebook page called the DC Capstone Report. Well, today on the DC Capstone Report, in our first segment, we're going to review the scrimmage. We're going to look and see what the team is doing as they end up fall practice. In our second segment, we're going to highlight a couple of players who have really stood out in the scrimmages so far, look for big things from this year. And then finally, we're going to highlight one of our coaches in the third and final segment, Jeff Banks, who works our special teams. You've been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is featured each Tuesday morning on Tide 102.9, The Morning Blitz with Martin Houston. You can listen live at Tide1029.com. Well, the DC Capstone Report this week, review in our first segment the scrimmage that just took place and kind of signaled the end of fall camp. It was a scrimmage where Coach Saban stated that what he was going to try to do, he's going to work the players in as much of a game time situation as possible. So by that, he means he's going to kind of run the length of the field on some plays. We're going to work on special teams, the kicking, the kickoffs, the punting, field goals, that sort of thing. Going to put the team in a regular game situation where they have to drive the length of the field and maybe work on some red zone things. But going into it, his whole idea was to try to work as a regular game time because it would be the last time in fall camp that they get to do that. And my sources that were at the scrimmage, said it was one of the best offensive outputs they'd seen in a long time by an Alabama Crimson Tide team. So that goes a lot, as many of the good teams we've had over the years. So, in kind of a review, I think Coach Saban was very pleased with the offensive output. He wasn't as pleased with the defense, but not the entire defense. I think a lot of the times the defense actually showed some good plays, and I'll get into that in just a little bit when we talk more specifics. But in general, I think the defense gave up some big plays. There were times where the defensive backs did a really good job and look really well, but they're young. And we've said several times that we think one of the hardest things that Coach Saban's got to do is replace that defensive backfield. I know a lot of people have kind of not talked about that, but that is an awesome responsibility to come in and play at this level in the SEC and play every down. And I think that's what happened in the scrimmage. The defensive backs played good on certain downs. They held the receivers to limit them on certain downs, but then they would give up the big play, and that came with just a lapse in thinking and thought, putting themselves in the right position, that sort of thing, and they gave up some big plays. Now, that is concerning going into this first game against Louisville, and Bobby Petrino is going to be testing that young defensive backfield with some big plays and try to hit some. My hope is that we've advanced to the point at the Louisville game where the young defensive backs are tested, but they still don't give up the big plays. I think there's opportunities to get some turnovers if Louisville starts throwing the ball like I think they are in that first game. But getting back to the scrimmage, it seemed like the offense had the upper hand this time, and it wasn't because of any situational plays. In other words, it wasn't because they started in the red zone and tried to score. The offense had some great scoring plays from long distances during the time. So I think the overall aspect of this scrimmage, we can say that the defense was in the first scrimmage. They had the upper hand. The offense had the upper hand in this second scrimmage. And really, Lance, our listeners out there who know what's going on with football, it's usually that second scrimmage where the offense really catches up with the defense. The defense usually shows out in the first scrimmage because it's easier for them to get the plays and get in the right positions. It's harder for the offense to get the plays and get in the right position. So it looks like our offense is catching up, and that's a positive thing. Now let's go and look at some of the specifics that happened in the scrimmage. My sources were there, reported back to me, and the number one thing they said when two different sources tell me that Jalen Hertz really showed his true potential in this scrimmage. He looked like a different quarterback from the first scrimmage to the second scrimmage. He elevated his game and did everything well. One of the sources told me that he had several long completions for the ball in the air over 50 yards or more. He was able to go through his progressions. I think he is doing what the quarterback's coach, Dan Enos, has been teaching him to do. And he said a couple of times he looked like he was going to break down and run, but then thought about it, caught himself, looked for his second or third choice on receivers, and made some completions that made a difference in keeping drives alive. So I think that what they were surprised about was he kept drives alive when he had the ball running the offense with his arm instead of with his legs as he has in the past. So I think that's an improvement of what the coaches were looking for out of him. I think he was safe with the ball. He didn't have many turnovers and did a really good job. He had some really deep balls that were caught for touchdowns, and that was some of the big plays that I alluded to earlier that the defensive back give up. But on the defensive side of the ball, when the team started out, I believe when Tua was quarterbacking, my sources told me that they went at 3 and out through a 3 straight series. The defense really stopped them. But then the defense kind of got a lapse in I don't know if it's because it was tired or because they were complacent, but something happened and they got to a point where they got a lapse in judgment and began to get some of the deep balls thrown on them. But they did do some good jobs when Tua was playing. He did not have a good game. From my sources tell me he didn't do good in this scrimmage. He did fair. But there were several plays where he was sacked. I think one of the sources counted that he was sacked around 6 or 7 times. And it was not because the offensive line wasn't blocking. It was because the defensive backs played so well on those plays that there were coverage sacks. We're talking about 4 to 6 seconds went by. Everybody was covered and he couldn't get the ball out. And then our line was able to catch up with him and sack him. So he also had some balls that he threw were wounded ducks that got picked off. So I think he kind of regressed in this second scrimmage, and kind of Jalen Hertz got the upper hand. So as far as the quarterback competition, I think it's still all well and good. I think it's still going to go on into the first game, and I think it's really up for grabs as to which one takes care of the ball, which one does what Coach Saban wants them to do. And in any event, we know at the end of it, and right before we walk on the field that day, Coach Saban is going to put the best players on the field at every position, including the quarterback position. But I think just an overall summary is the offense had the best upper hand in this scrimmage. Really want to see that. Good to see that. Good to see Jalen Hertz have a good game, and good to see some of the young receivers going out there catching those balls. It looks like Alabama comes out of the fall camp with some injuries. We noticed that Chris Allen was injured prior to this scrimmage. He looked like he'd be out for the season. That's another outside linebacker. We already lost Terrell Lewis, so we're going to be thin at the outside linebacker position. Coach Saban was pretty testy when asked about that. He worries about it every day, he says, and they're looking for bodies to come into those places and outside linebacker and make a difference. So coming out of this scrimmage, nicked up a little bit. Offense has the upper hand. Defense has some work to do. And overall, the team is not where the Coach Saban wants them to be, but they're making progress. You've been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is brought to you each time this week by freelancepictures.com. Well, Lance, in this second segment, I wanted to highlight for our listeners out there some of the young players, some of the players that are stepped up in this scrimmage to make a difference. And I want to go right to the offense side of the ball, starting out. And the young freshman that is really making a difference out there right now, that he's turning heads. Every one of my sources said, hey, this guy here, you see him, he jumps off the field at you as to his speed and his quickness. He has both speed and quickness. And that is the freshman out of Texas, Jalen Waddell. Now, some people pronounce it Waddell. Jalen Waddell is what I've been saying it. But he is a freshman out of Texas. We don't know much about him. Of course, he hasn't been able to speak to the media. Won't be able to his first year. But just seeing him in the scrimmages, he just really jumps off the field as his quickness, got that first step quickness, got that quick cut, and he has had some really open speed, opening it up to really pull away from the defenders. In this scrimmage, he has several touchdowns, several long touchdown passes, several long completions from Jalen Hertz. Really a ball going 40 or 50 yards in the air and him running under it. Just really can't out-throw him. He's got so much speed. So you add him to the mix of the sophomore receivers that are coming back, those super sophomores like Jerry Judy, who I've heard has been picking up the pace. You got Henry Rhodes III, who's doing well, and Devontae Smith. Of course, everybody knows the last time we saw him, he was running the end zone, catching the touchdown that won the national championship. So you add in Jalen Waddell to that group, and we are really going to be strong at the wide receivers. Behind them, you got Darius Townsend, who's going to come along, that I've highlighted before. I'm really high on him. And I look for Tyrell Shavers to make a difference with his length, his long arms, and his body, especially on those 50-50 balls that we've lost before. I think he's going to make a difference. So on offense, those are some of the players I think is doing really good. We had a little injury in the running backs. Najee Harris has a little leg injury. He's in a cast on a scooter for about a week. Looks like he's going to be back for the game. Not sure if he's going to be 100% yet, but it does look like Josh Jacobs is going to be 100%. Damian Harris and Brian Robinson in the backfield. So with Tula and Jalen doing so well, and the running backs doing well, and these wide receivers stepping up, you got the total package when you add in Held Hinges and Irv Smith, Kendrick James, and Miller Forstall at the tight ends, and then that great offensive line, which they're trying to put the best five on the field. And this past week, we saw kind of a different lineup where they brought in Jonah Williams at one tackle spot and Jedrick Wills at the other tackle spot, move Alex Leatherwood to guard, and you had Lester Cotton at guard and Ross Piercebaker at center. I don't know if that's just an experiment to kind of cross-train because you need people that can play all the positions, but I do know Matt Womack was hurt. So this might be a way to get your best five players on the field. So overall, offensively, all of those players did a good job. On the defense, Coach Saban singled out two players. And when Coach Saban singles out two players in a scrimmage or two players in the fall camp that's caught his eye in that defensive backfield that's so young, he singled out Xavier McKinney and Trayvon Diggs as being the two that he thought he could pencil in as being two he could count on. Now, all accounts I've heard from my sources that were at the scrimmage, both of them did really well in the scrimmage. So I look for Trayvon Diggs and Xavier McKinney to be starting when we play against Louisville. Probably Deontay Thompson at the other safety has the opportunity to start. He has the most experience, about 3 games of experience back there. Playing alongside McKinney might be really two good tacklers there. And then it looks like you got Trayvon Diggs at one corner. I think for Savion Smith to take over that other corner spot. But there's a young 5-star freshman that's really doing well, and that's Patrick Surtain, Jr. So I look for Patrick Surtain to even move up and take that other corner spot from Savion Smith. Or you might see him in more of a Minka Fitzpatrick role that Minka played when he was a freshman and couldn't keep him off the field. And that's that star in the dime package. So if we play a lot, I think Louisville's going to come out throwing the ball. I believe we're going to be a lot in that dime package. So I wouldn't be surprised to have a true freshman 5-star and Patrick Surtain Jr. starting in that star position. Now, I think he's the one that's got the best chance of starting. You got some other young talent like Josh Jobe and some other people on the team that's been there before, like Kerry McDonald and others at defensive backfield that could play, but they haven't been making the moves as much as Patrick Surtain is. And I think he's just a little above all the other freshmen, a little ahead based on his talent-wise and based on his catching on to the process. So on defense, the defensive backfield has got some work to do. The linebackers are going to be short and thin across the board, and middle linebacker and outside linebackers, but both are doing well. But in this scrimmage, the defensive line in Raekwon Davis, Isaiah Buggs, and Quinion Williams looked awesome, pushing the line around, doing really well. So I look for our defensive line on the forefront to be really good. Then you add in Fadarian Mathis, LeBron Ray, and Johnny Dwight coming in and spelling those players on the defensive line. Look for our defense to really be solid if they have an opportunity to gel with all these young players before the opening game against Louisville. You've been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is brought to you by freelancepictures.com. Be sure to go online and check us out for other valuable Alabama football content. And go on Facebook and like the DC Capstone Report page for future updates. Well, Lance, in this last segment, I want to highlight one of the coaches, which I think everybody is not talking about as much because of his position that he coaches, but that is Jeff Banks, that Alabama got away from Texas A&M. Me being a lawyer, my profession, I kind of ears perked up this week when I saw that Texas A&M Board of Regents voted to sue Jeff Banks in the contract dispute. But that's not the reason I'm highlighting him here. I'm highlighting him because from all accounts I've heard from my sources that went to the scrimmages and have been involved in all of the practices leading up in fall camp, Jeff Banks has really put in a special teams game plan that's second to none. We're going to have a step up in all of our specialists. He's worked well with our kickers. I think we're going to be solid at place kicker, whichever one of the ones that win the job there. And then the punter, I think Skylar DeLong has come a long way. And I believe he's going to have an opportunity to even increase his hang time and his length under Jeff Banks. But I believe what we're going to see the most improvement is our return game, our kickoff return game and our punt return game. And I'm just going to go ahead and make a prediction that freshman that I spoke about earlier in the second segment, Jalen Waddell, he, I believe, is going to make an immediate impact on punt returns and kickoff returns. His speed, his knowledge of quickness, his knowledge of how to hit the hole and how to use his blockers has really been on out forefront of his learning curve as a freshman. So Jeff Banks is kind of is under his tutelage, has tutored him in just like he did Christian Kirk, who is a great receiver, and out of Texas A&M, it really stepped up their special team. So I give a shout out to Jeff Banks. He has done a great job so far. I think it could be a sleeper hire for Coach Saban. He went out and got the best person at that position. And not to mention he is one of the best recruiters and has really recruited well in his upcoming classes coming in. I think Jeff Banks is going to make a big difference when we take the field against Louisville for our first game. You've been listening to the DC Capstone Report. The DC Capstone Report is featured each Tuesday morning on Tide 102.9, The Morning Blitz with Martin Houston. You can listen live at Tide1029.com.